My husband David left me, who was pregnant, and my mother-in-law, who was diagnosed Alzheimer, on the highway in order to rush to take care of his ideal lover, who was having a depressive episode. 5 days later, my bruised and battered mother-in-law was taken back to the hospital by a Good Samaritan, and I was nowhere to be found. My fingerprints and DNA were detected on the wounds on my mother-in-law's body. So, I was listed as a key suspect with a citywide bounty on me. In the news video, David warned in a cold voice. The suspect, Arya, has a vicious mind. If your life is under duress, please be brave enough to defend yourself. It turns out the man I've been married to for 5 years hates me so much. But why, when someone took my head to collect the bounty, he emotionally broke down? At the entrance of the police station in the early morning, David watches the others posting the reward notice. He looks serious, with disgust in his eyes as he looks at my picture on the reward notice. The young intern cop beside him casts a furtive glance at him and then hesitates to speak. David, could it be a mistake? Arya is a righteous citizen. She's assisted us in solving many big cases. How could she do something criminal? The young intern cop is Oliver, my former high school buddy. At a time when David and I haven't yet gotten divorced over his ideal lover, Chloe. I would often take the time to deliver a love bento to him after taking care of my mother-in-law. David is a forensic scientist and is familiar with them all. Oliver and other young guys would simply exclaim in envy. I'm so envious of David and Arya's divine love. At that time, David looked at me with arched eyebrows, contentedly eating the braised pork ribs I had cooked. After eating, he didn't forget to squeeze them. Arya is the baby I chased for 3 years, and you can just be envious. At that time, I had a happy marriage and my mother-in-law loved me as her own daughter before she got Alzheimer's. More than once I've smiled and woken up from dream at midnight, marveling at how lucky I really am. However, everything ended abruptly on the day the ballet star Chloe returned back home. A high-speed kidnapping 6 months ago. The one who kidnapped Chloe was her avid male fan. Concerning a celebrity, the rescue was broadcast live to reporters. So, I could see David, who had originally promised to come home on vacation to spend his wedding anniversary with me. After the hostages were safe, he pushed through the crowd with panic and rushed forward to take the disheveled Chloe into his arms. With hot tears in his eyes, he couldn't stop kissing Chloe's brow, as if he had finally found the long-lost jewel. After that day, David no longer had a place for me in his heart. As of this moment. After hearing Oliver's words, David looks indifferent. You don't know Arya well enough. She looks kind, but her is vicious and schemed inside. I feel my heart has been stabbed through with a knife, and I clench my palms in death. Only to find that as a soul, I have no feelings. Oliver can't say anything else when he hears such an answer. At that moment, he suddenly raises his cell phone and shouts, "Sir, someone said that a floating corpse was found in the river underneath the Harmony Lake Bridge, and after be judged, it's a female corpse." I sniff and hold my breath. Harmony Lake Bridge. Take someone and go check it out right away. It's very likely that the victim is also from Arya and his gang. After David finishes scolding me with righteous indignation, he turns and sends a voice message, and his expression is instantly gentle. Chloe, don't be afraid, wait for me to go back. So it is Chloe, no wonder he is so patient. To think that he once have a rule after he married me. That is, he doesn't want to be disturbed by private messages when he is working. I've been married to him for 5 years, and even when I was in a car accident, I never sent him a message asking for help. But now, I am forced to follow David around and watch as he hurried back to the villa that he has purposely purchased for Chloe. The moment she sees David, Chloe instantly reddened her eyes. David! David, however, is even more nervous than she is. He picks up Chloe, who is only wearing a white shirt, with one hand. His gaze falls on her bare feet and says with a scolding tone, "Why don't you wear shoes at home?" Chloe's cheeks flush red, burying her small face into David's arms and sobbing. Just had a nightmare, dreamed about the man who kidnapped me that day, and Arya behind him. Suddenly I hear my name and feel baffled. What does her kidnapping have to do with me? Chloe opens her big wet eyes and looks pleadingly at David. David, please save my brother. He's been undercover in the crime syndicate for so many years. He can't lose everything because of Arya. My eyelids flutter and my heart instantly seizes up. What is she babbling about? David carries Chloe up to the bedroom in the second floor and coaxes her gently. Don't worry, your brother will be fine. I've got it all set up. Chloe snuggles into his arms and falls into a deep sleep not much later. David tenderly and reverently kissed the corners of her eyes, the deep love in his eyes almost overflowing. I've seen this scene so many times that my numb heart can no longer make waves. After Chloe appeared, David almost never returned home again. The only other time was 5 days ago when he and I drove my mother-in-law back to the nursing home. We ended up being left behind again halfway because of Chloe's illness. In David's eyes, Chloe is more important than the whole world. He even bought house for her because she just returned to the country and is all settled down, and let his good friends in the entertainment industry help Chloe with signing agency. He even personally used his identity to dispel rumors when there was negative news coming out about Chloe. I also found out from his good buddy's mouth. It turns out that Chloe has been his goddess from the time she transferred to become David's deskmate in his senior year of high school. As for me, it was only because I danced the dance that Chloe had danced at the opening ceremony of the university, then I was madly pursued by David. It feels like I've experienced a dream. It turns out what I thought was a happy marriage is just as a reward for being the substitute of the Chloe. But David didn't know that the so-called pure and beautiful goddess in his eyes. In some people's eyes, it used to be a horrible nightmare in high school. David waited until Chloe fell asleep before hurrying to the scene of the crime, only to find the police officers looking resentful and planning to call it a day. Dr. Zhao, it's not a female corpse, it's just a plastic mannequin from a clothing store, and the person who reported the case was highly nearsighted and misread it. Oliver looked embarrassed. David's tense expression loosened slightly, and he was about to leave. But a police dog was heard barking furiously. Looking in the direction, it was an abandoned dump station. It was the height of summer and the stench in the dump was overwhelming. In 5 minutes, though, the crowd turned up the source of the stench: 3 black plastic bags. Oliver opened the bag and looked at it with a grave expression. David, forensics, it's human tissue. The whole room was appalled. Back at the police station, within an hour, David had already pieced together the 3 bags of body parts. I looked at the familiar body on the autopsy table and my heart nearly popped out. And yet, you can't help fantasizing. David hates me so much. Will he feel sorry for me when he finds out the truth? The body had been tortured during its lifetime, with comminuted fractures to the thigh and calf bones. There were humiliating words deliberately carved into the chest, as well as hand and foot tendons that had been snapped, but the victim wasn't really dead at the time. David opened his mouth. So not only does the killer who committed this case have a sadistic sociopathic personality, but he also seems to have an extraordinarily intense hatred for his victims. And the victims' fingerprints were corroded off with sulfuric acid, which is a brutal method. He continued to frown as he surveyed the rotting corpse, but his eyes snapped to a halt as they skimmed over a wound that had obviously been gouged out of its flesh. I also had a sudden pain in my heart that felt like suffocation when I saw the bruise. It was one of my favorite tattoos, with the number of my marriage license to David. But it was plucked out alive by a murderer while I was still alive. The man was masked, his voice hoarse, and he laughed in my ear. Not pretending to be noble, accompany me to hell. I clutched my head and groaned in pain. The voice was familiar, but I forgot exactly who it was. David couldn't see my pain. His expression was incredibly calm, and it was still a little tight when I looked closely. Let's identify the victim first. But without fingerprints and relying on DNA testing, it could take a while. Speaking of this, David inexplicably wandered off a bit, and he suddenly asked, "No news of Arya yet?" Oliver shook his head. "No." All I was left with was a bitter smile. "Don't worry, in this world, there's no more me." David frowned at his words and said, "I'll double-check this body for Arya's fingerprints and DNA. I suspect she joined a crime syndicate, and this woman's body should be a know-it-all who was silenced." Oliver wanted to say something, but finally nodded. I couldn't help but sneer out a laugh that seemed to bring tears to my eyes. I only thought he didn't love me, but I didn't realize that he already hated me so much that he couldn't find my person, and he wanted to ruin my reputation. David took my picture and went to the hospital. When he pushed open the hospital room and I saw my mother-in-law lying unconscious in the hospital bed, my heart was broken. My father died when I was in high school, and after I got together with David, my mother-in-law treated me like her own daughter. But today, my mother-in-law is all over the place. Sinking pain also flashed in David's eyes as he sat next to his mother-in-law and held her hand, his tone low. "Mom, don't worry, as long as I'm still alive, I'll definitely assist the team in apprehending Arya and avenging you." Drip drip. But he didn't realize that his mother-in-law's heart detector suddenly reacted just as he spoke. David hardly got up to look for the paramedics, but his mother-in-law opened her eyes and grabbed him, her voice pale and urgent. "Minger, quickly go save Anran." Before David could hear him, Chloe's voice suddenly sounded from the doorway. "David! Granny is awake?" Sinclawepier, the mother-in-law, reacted even more strongly. "She goes! Let her go!" said the man who couldn't stop waving his arms. Chloe instantly went white, but I didn't miss the disgust and viciousness that flashed under her eyes. My heart was instantly in my throat. "Zhao Yiming, don't leave her alone with Mom. There's something wrong with Chloe." But David couldn't hear my hysterical voice at all. He shielded Chloe in his arms for comfort. "Mom can't recognize anyone right now. She probably recognized you as Arya." Only then did Chloe's expression get better as she gently advised David. "Ming, you go and get busy. I'll take care of Mom here." David smiled warmly at her words, catching over her hand and kissing her palm, his tone intimate. "You changed your mind before you married into the Zhao family?" Chloe's cheeks were red with shame. At this time, David received a call from Oliver. The full report hasn't come out yet, but colleagues found an embedded chip in the female corpse's arm, which was tested to be it's Arya's cell phone card. Zhao Yiming instantly sank his eyebrows. "Chloe, you watch Mom here. I'll take you to your favorite restaurant for dinner tonight." Chloe smiled harmlessly. "Go about your business, I'm here." David was relieved to leave. My heart, however, sank to the bottom, but I couldn't leave David's side. I could only look on in despair as 2 lines of tears flowed from my mother-in-law's cloudy eyes. Inside the autopsy room, David looked at the data in his cell phone card. The last 3 calls were dialed to him, but they didn't connect. David looked at the flat screen interface with a cold expression. Oliver, on the other hand, looked at the shattered body and spoke in a grave tone. "Sir, I suspect that this body is Arya's." David stiffened for a moment at his words, then snorted out a laugh. "Arya played us for a fool. Wasn't the purpose to mislead us? Keep checking, this corpse can't be Arya. A nasty woman like her whose father was a criminal, she definitely couldn't let go of death and might have smuggled herself out of the country by now." The more he spoke, the angrier he became, as if he really believed I had committed a crime of 10 evils. My soul is completely cold. When he first started chasing me, he had nothing but heartache for me when he learned that my dad came from a poor background and was still a high school dropout. He even made a point of studying it for 3 days when he learned that I hadn't had his best egg fried rice since my father died. Just for me to taste that flavor I remember so well. But now, turns out, he actually never looked up to me or my dad. How ridiculous that the first half of my life, the marriage I thought was beautiful, was so ridiculous. But my dad was never a criminal. He's the bravest man I've ever seen in my life. The coroner opened his mouth to say something, but was interrupted by the bell. David's eyebrows jumped as he tapped to connect, and the sound of Chloe's desperate cries came through. "Ming, it's bad, Arya." She suddenly appeared and pushed Mom off the rooftop. Rumble. The clear sky outside the window was thunderous, and under the white light, David's pupils suddenly shrunk, as if he had been struck by lightning. When David rushed to the hospital in a panic, there was only a bright red blood stain left on the grass. The doctor sighed towards the desperate-looking David. "Your condolences." Seeing David appear, Chloe jumped into his arms from the corner, covered in bruises. "David!" David gritted his teeth when he saw this. "Where did Arya hurt you?" "No, these injuries of mine are nothing." Chloe cried so hard that she almost fainted, and with her miserable face and red eyes, I've been begging her to leave Mom alone, but she won't. She says she hates you and your mom the most. She feels sick every day that she's married to you, and she wouldn't have married you at all if it hadn't been for the information she was getting. The more she spoke, the more agitated she became, and in the end, she even rolled her eyes and directly fainted. This time Zhao Yiming immediately panicked, rushed to call the paramedics to send Nan Jasmine to the emergency room. Only then, with tears in his eyes, did he lift the white cloth covering his mother-in-law. With just one glance, his eyes were instantly crimson. He spoke almost viciously, grinding his back teeth. "Arya, I want you to die." I smiled miserably and muttered my opening, "But David, I'm already dead." Oliver, who had learned the news, also rushed over, and he was followed by security guards from the defense section. The surveillance was artificially deleted. Oliver was panting and had a very anxious expression. The security guard behind him stumbled over a poorly spoken Mandarin. At that time, I suddenly had a stomach ache and then went to the restroom. But the door of the monitoring room was locked. I did not expect that in just a few minutes, the monitoring was deleted. David's body felt like it was stripped of its strength as he said in a deep voice with red eyes. "No need, I know who did it. It was Arya, who has hated me since the day she married me." Oliver was very shocked. "It's Arya? But hasn't she already?" David was just about to nod his head when the security guard at the side froze. "Schoolgirl?" But what I saw was a big man. David was shaken and looked at him furiously. The guard shivered with fear, but nodded firmly. It was a tall man with an inch haircut and tattoos on his arms. Didn't look like a nice guy anyway. The more David listened, the more his brows tightened. Compared to the security guard's words, he was more willing to choose to believe Chloe. "You could be wrong. The one who pushed my mother down the stairs was Arya, a woman." Instead, the guard laughed nervously and waved his hand. "How is it possible? The rooftop railing is at least 1.3 meters high. How can a woman have this strength?" A word to the wise. David thought of something, his pupils shrank, and he was suddenly dumbfounded. Oliver opened his mouth to say something, but was interrupted by the sound of the phone. He picked up the phone and his expression suddenly froze until it slowed down almost a minute later. David's pupils reflected Oliver's crumpled and pale face, and Oliver almost cried out the contents of the call. The team said that a mass of people found Meng's schoolmate, but only a head was left. It was as if David had been hit with a blow to the head. He subconsciously wanted to snort and retort, but he was appalled by the horror in Oliver's eyes. At that moment, his cell phone rang as well, from other forensic colleagues. The DNA test results are in. The victim's name is Arya. The test results are finally in. I smiled coldly as I surveyed David, who was driving beside me, and my heart didn't fluctuate. There was no one else in the car, so why was his eyes slightly red and who was he putting on a show for? The vehicle quickly arrived at the police station, and David almost rolled over and rushed into the autopsy room. A group of police officers were already waiting inside, none of them looking very good. After graduation, I worked as a psychological profiler and helped them solve several major cases. Teammates who were once considered side by side, now their bodies are separated. Oliver secretly turned her back and wiped her tears. When he immediately walked into the dissecting room, David instead didn't dare to go in. I saw that he suddenly pulled out his cell phone and started dialing my number over and over. But on the other end of the phone, there was only a cold female voice, mechanical and repetitive. "Sorry, the user you have dialed is not available. Please dial again later." The scene was déjà vu. Like when I've tried to call him countless times over the past 6 months to get a good talk. That's the only sound that awaits me. David dialed my number over and over again until the battery ran out and turned off. It was only then that he tried to react in general, slamming his cell phone into the ground as hard as he could. The whole house is dead silent. In the end, it was Oliver who came forward to comfort him. The person who reported the case is a cold storage truck driver. He transport process vehicle skidding sideways, only to find that he transported pork. There is a, "Now we have the man under control." Condolences. Condolences, my ass. David, however, suddenly roared. This is definitely Arya's trick. She has such an evil mind, planning a kidnapping case to kidnap Chloe and designing to hurt my mom. She's a poisonous woman. How could she possibly be willing to die? I stared blankly at David's sinewy neck and suddenly wanted to laugh. Laughing at myself for being so stupid as to fall in love with a man who doesn't know right from wrong. Oliver subconsciously retorted. How can the one who kidnapped club Arya? Isn't it Chloe's private fan? David was like an enraged madman at the moment. He rummaged through a bunch of printed screenshot evidence of surveillance records from his office and flung it in front of Oliver. The day Chloe was kidnapped, Arya had appeared in that neighborhood, and there are also chat records of her and the kidnapper. She instigated it. David, that's enough. A weak, raspy voice rang out, breaking the peace in the room. The crowd looked around with shocked expressions. Bureau Chen? Why are you out of the hospital? Even David put away the sharpness of his entire body and looked over in surprise. I looked at the loving face in my memory and my eyes watered. Uncle Chen. It took Bureau Chen a while to salvage himself from a transnational case. At this point, his face was still yellow from a major illness. He pushed aside David's hand that was about to come forward to help him and walked straight to the dissecting table. I wanted to stop him. He's the uncle who watched me grow up. How dare I show him such cruelty? No one in the bureau knew about my relationship with him, so at the moment, everyone was very surprised. David wants to stop Bureau Chen. Bureau Chen, you're only just sick. Look at this knot. Pa! What he waited for was a slap in the face from Bureau Chen with almost all his strength. No calling me. You beast! A good goddaughter of mine, handed over to you, has ended up in such a miserable state. How can you live up to her father's spirit in heaven? What? David had been the pride of heaven since he was a child and had never been treated like this before. He didn't suppress his fire, even though Bureau Chen was a senior whom he respected. Bureau Chen, you can't recklessly harbor Arya just because she's related to you. There's evidence for all her crimes, even if she's dead now. That's what she deserves. She was there that day to make a connection for me with an undercover agent we'd planted in the crime syndicate. Chen Bureau almost roared out these words in a low voice, and after he finished roaring, it was as if he was drained of energy, and his entire essence was no longer there. He was disheveled and hunched over, his dull eyes under drooping lids. He pulled a yellowed group photo out of his pocket, and it was him on the young, straight face. And the skinny, shady, scarred boy beside him was my father. My father was the first undercover informant planted in the crime syndicate by Bureau Chen's. Until death, my father fulfilled his duty. His father, Meng Lan, is an informant I've worked with all my life. Thanks to the many times he risked his life to pass on the right information for us, we were able to crack more than 100 large-scale criminal operations over the course of 23 years. Bureau Chen whispered into the photo. Toward the end, the old man, who had been serious all his life in front of his subordinates, bawled his eyes out. But now, I just live in the field hospital out. My good comrade's daughter was stigmatized as a criminal. How can you all let me still have the face to go down to see him? The room was dead silent. No one expected the truth to be like this. Only David was still mouthy, his eyes red and his neck stalking. How do you explain the chat logs then? And the DNA on my mom, on Arya? David, you've been smart all your life, but for the sake of a woman, you'd rather go against your conscience, and you're perjuring yourself. Bureau Chen lifted his eyelids. He hated it and said, "Do you really think that I don't know about this matter of you deleting her brother-related surveillance videos for Chloe?" David's blood faded as he panicked. "Do you know what her brother Nenjakwan is?" At the desperate look of David, Chen Bureau sighed. The only thing left was disappointment. He's the one who killed Arya, her father, Meng Lan, and absconded for nearly 10 years. Originally, we had a chance to catch him. But the surveillance was deleted by you and the trail broke. Want to know what Thekla you've loved all your life is? Want to know the past of Arya whom you've hated for so long? I'll give you a chance to find out for yourself. Chloe. Those 3 words, along with Chloe, made up my high school nightmare. I remember everything. The day Chloe was kidnapped, I went to the mall in that neighborhood for Uncle Chen to make a joint. I've always proceeded with caution and don't count myself as a familiar face to criminals. The connector was a coworker of my dad's. But Uncle Chan doesn't know that this colleague has been assimilated by the criminals. I've been targeted by crime syndicates for that very reason. And Chloe, the head of that group. They kept following me, and I was so scared that I tried to call David to tell him about it, but his phone never worked. The only time I got through, it was answered by Nan Chloe. She chuckled softly. Looking for Ming? But he's washing my underwear right now. Oh, a little busy. I held my fire. I'm looking for my husband, David. Chloe, however, snorted out a laugh. I know who you are, Arya, the one who was humiliated by my brother, the little bitch. A word that knocked me into an endless abyss. It was like I was back in that black summer when I was 17. It was also the day that my dad, who came home from work, found me being bullied by Nanjakwan, and in order to save me, he stopped Nanjakwan in a fury. But he's old, and he's had a lot of injuries from years of living undercover. It's no match for Chloe at all. What's more, Chloe had brought a knife. That day, for the first time in history, Uncle Chen used his connections to get the city's top medical team to save my dad. But there was no rescue. I lost the only family I had the summer before my senior year of high school. And after the incident, Nan Jakwan fled. Chloe also couldn't stand the school's gossip and transferred to another school. It was only me, living forever in that black summer. Until after college, when she met David. I thought I had finally met my salvation. But what I didn't expect was to fall into the next abyss. The day I was abandoned on the highway by David, I was going to have a showdown with him. I don't expect him to save me, but at least don't hurt my mother-in-law because of me. She's innocent. But I didn't expect that before I could say anything. Chloe's call came back. Since being kidnapped, she's never been able to go on stage again due to depression. In David's eyes, the Nan Chloe who was unable to dance was the little swan with broken wings. It's something that needs to be held in the palm of your hand and cared for. However, as long as he took a hard look at the comments about the Chloe on the extranet, he would have realized that Nan Chloe was not a so-called ballet star at all. She just made friends with some thugs when she went to school abroad for ballet and packaged herself on the thugs' dime. She's back in the country, and it's just thugs breaking the bank, and she doesn't have anyone else in the country better suited to ringing up money. So David, whose family has slight assets and connections, is targeted by her and directs a kidnapping to grab his sympathy and attention. I also heard this information from Chloecuan before I died. He hated me. He said he wouldn't have killed my dad and become a fugitive if I hadn't given him a face in the first place. He also said that Chloe had slept with David long ago and that I was a rotten thing that no one wanted no matter what. Finally, he put the knife to my neck and said, with a sardonic smile, "Aren't you pretending to be noble? Accompany me to hell." Jab. Bright white lightning cut through the night, illuminating the face of David, who was paralyzed on the floor in the dilapidated rental house. As white as paper. His hands were handcuffed, and beside him lay my diary from high school. March 12, 2013. Today, Nan Chloe brought her little sister to throw bugs into my rice again, so childish. But at night, Dad was a little angry when he heard about it. Alas, Dad usually works too hard to worry him in the future. March 20th, 2013. Chloe blocked me in the toilet today and forced me to lick the toilet bowl. I hit her for the first time. But she went so far as to run to the teacher and tell her that I was bullying her. Many students in the class spoke for Chloe. They called me a motherless child, so it's normal to be jealous of Chloe. Actually, they're right. I was picked up from the trash by my dad. But I have my dad. April 27th, 2013. Midterms are coming up soon. Chloe doesn't know what's gotten into her again and insists that I like the boy she has a crush on. Put pins in my dancing shoes. This crazy bitch. That hurts. Looks like I'm going to have to take next period's gym class off. May 10th, 2013. I don't like her brother Chloe. He looks at people with a scary look. My dad said to stay away from him too. But Chloecuan seems to know where my house is. A little worried. May 15th, 2013. Today, the end of the evening self-study was early, and I was surprised to come home and find Nanjakwan waiting at the door. Is he a pervert? I wanted to call the police, but Uncle Chan was busy and I didn't want to bother him. Dad's been working on a big case lately too. He's been out early and he's been in late. Well, never mind. Take the stick out some other time. May 22nd, 2013. I found shoe prints of adult men under the bed in the bedroom. June 3rd, 2013. Why am I not the one who died? 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 Finished reading? Uncle Chen pushed open the door of the rental house and walked in. He coldly looked at David, whose eyes were scarlet with remorse, and snorted. So you've been married to Anran for 5 years and you haven't even visited your old home with her? You don't even know her past. Who is it that you love? David's hands trembled, burying his head into his palm as if he could no longer control it, wailing. I'm sorry, Anran, I didn't know. If I had known earlier. Don't pretend to be affectionate. Uncle Chan sneers. Stand up, I'm going to show you what that so-called white moonlight Chloe of yours really is. Inside the hospital room, Chloe stood by the window smoking a cigarette with a phone call in her ear. She sounded dismissive. Don't worry, the surveillance is deleted. David, that idiot, believes whatever I say. He likes me? Men are all the same. They just like my face. I don't like him. He's poor. He can't even afford a nanny in that villa, and he doesn't have the money to buy me a sports car or a bag, so what do I like about him? With that said, she reached up and admired her manicure, snickering as she continued. Arya, who like David is dead, hey. I am indeed an idiot. David's ice-cold voice line suddenly resounded within the hospital room. Frightened, the Chloe did not even clamp the cigarette. She said in a panicked tone, What are you doing here? Don't get me wrong, Ming, I'm just going over my lines with my actor friend. David smiled sarcastically. Should I believe it? Seeing the handcuffs between his hands, Chloe suddenly understood what was going on, her expression suddenly relaxing, and her expression changing from her usual innocence to indifference. Even if you heard it, so what? I'm innocent, and you have no evidence to arrest me, said her rosy lips curling into a big smile. You forgot? You deleted all the surveillance that could find my brother. Satisfied that David's face was turning white inch by inch, she neatly straightened her skirt and walked enchantingly past him, casting a sidelong glance at him and said, compassionately, In your next life, don't be so blind, stupid. With that said, she pushed the door open, only to crash into the sight of a group of real guns of the criminal police. The leader of the group, Bureau Chen, held a miniature surveillance camera and said with an expressionless face, You thought your and your brother's scheme was seamless? However, Comrade Arya knew from the beginning that you would not let her go, so she slipped this into her mother-in-law Huang Fenghua's button. It recorded the entirety of your and your brother's crimes, and what awaits you will be the judgment of the law. The look on Chloe's face was like a bolt from the blue, and she subconsciously grabbed her cell phone to send a message. But David behind her suddenly spoke. While you were on the phone with your brother, we had already locked your brother Ninjayaquan's location through localization. Now, he has been captured. It was then that Chloe realized her situation and hurriedly wailed for mercy. But nothing can be undone. The criminals were all finally caught. This should be a happy ending for all. However, I wasn't very happy. If I could do it again, I would definitely not agree to David's confession. I'll cooperate with Uncle Chan and avenge my dad with my own hands. But life is ironic. Forget it, it's all dead. That's all. It's strange though, it's logical that the people who got me killed are all in jail. Chloe was sentenced to immediate execution. Chloe was sentenced to 13 years, her reputation collapsed, and she was claimed nearly $100 million by her collaborators, and she lost all the money she had earned over the years. And there's a middle-aged woman in that prison of hers who is on death row for killing her husband and is the mom of the schoolgirl she bullied into jumping out of a building in high school. It is said that during her first month in prison, Nan Chloe couldn't take it anymore and committed suicide with a sharpened toothbrush. Everyone I hate is dead. I'm supposed to be going to reincarnation. But no. The ghost of the child in the tomb next to me said it was because there was still a strong earthly obsession holding me back. Who is it? Uncle Chan? But Uncle Chen came back to visit me every week with my favorite strawberry cupcakes. A year later, Uncle Chan didn't come either. He sacrificed himself. But he gave his life to catch the biggest head of the crime syndicate and died with him. It's great that he's finally accomplished his mission. But I still didn't leave. And so it waited and waited and waited as winter turned to spring. In the early summer mornings of the 4th year, I waited for David. He's not the good, handsome, sunny forensic scientist I remember. Today he is thin and stooped, with 3 fingers missing from the palm of his right hand, and walking with a pronounced limp on his left leg. There was also a long scar on his otherwise handsome face. He was carrying a strawberry cupcake and a stack of letters. He sat awkwardly on his hands and knees in front of my tombstone and began to read me the letters he had written in prison. I don't want to hear it. He said he regretted it, and if he hadn't chosen the Chloe in the first place, he and I would have been a very loving couple and would have had a pair of lovely children. I said, I don't want to have your baby. He said the prison was full of prisoners he had taken in, and those for years were hard. I say, you deserve it. he said. Anran, I'm sorry. It's my selfishness that harmed you and my mom. I said yes. He said, Anran, give me a chance to make it up to you in my next life, okay? I was silent. He said, Anran, I atone for my sins with my life. Can you forgive me? I could see what he was trying to do, but I couldn't stop it. Blood gradually stained the masonry in front of my tombstone. His life force is draining away, and the obsession in me is disappearing. For a moment, my form was almost transparent. The dying David finally saw me. He barely hooked his fingers and tried to come and touch me. Instead, I walked over to him and spoke coldly in a tone he could hear. David, I don't forgive you. Ever. In the endless despair, the divine splendor of David's eyes dissipated. He's not like me. I have no attachment to him, so if he dies, he dies. I stood up, running toward the rising sun that was gradually rising in the sky.